Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of our malicious compliance. Want to log everything I do? Sure, I can do that. This was almost 10 years ago, contracting for a very large financial services provider. For some context, team manager was promoted to a new division, and the team, 8 of us working across 2 shifts to cover international as well, were left with 2 team leaders, we'll call them Moron Boy and Passive Gal, to run the crapshow until the new manager was hired. New manager joined 6 months later, or early, depending on perspective, and probably because of me. My job in a nutshell was to onboard new employees into all the required systems for their daily functions, as well as set up their email and Active Directory accounts for server access, which was dumped on my lap a month into my job because I had prior experience, so said Moron Boy. I didn't mind the email and Active Directory because it's literally 2 minutes per account and didn't affect my central function by more than 20 minutes a day, it'll make sense soon. And audits were 30 minutes a week. This all happened from a centrally shared mailbox. It's requests, so you can't determine how busy you are. On to the fun. Almost before the door hit the manager on the way out, Moron Boy and Passive Gal call us into a meeting room and states that we must do no less than 10 requests a day, all to be logged on their call logging system, and here's the contract amendments we must sign or be fired. Being a contractor, you'd think I would shut the hell up, but nope, I just can't do being kicked in the balls, so I piped up I don't see how it's possible to guarantee 80 requests a day minimum for every team member to meet the requirement. Why not scalar the ticket count and see who did what? His face turned a deeper color and he shouts at me to mind my own business. I don't know what I am talking about. Cue my malicious compliance, which included calling my contract house manager, sassy and funny gal, explained what was happening, and after she could breath again from laughing so hard, she told me not to get her fired. I head back to my desk, knowing full well audits are about to start in a week, and I get multiple requests to make amendments on accounts to test Active Directory security. And LO, here it begins. I got an email 2 days later to prep for a massive test. I am tasked to amend nearly 6,000 accounts with new settings, and then change them back on request, with minimal impact to the users, during working hours, so I needed to do this quickly. Now, any tech worth his measure out there will know, almost anything is scriptable. I set it all up, called my mate at service desk, and here's the funny thing, he also has a script to log multiple tickets. Roll on D-Day. I take the auditor's call at 8 a.m. to make the change. I send the email to my deskmate, and he logs the tickets in a record 30 seconds. My mailbox booms with 6K open tickets. I run my script and 90 seconds later, bam, job done. I carried on with my core function. 3 hours later, auditor called me to revert. I ran my second script, everything back to normal, called my mate to close the tickets, and a minute later my mailbox frazzled for a bit getting 6K closure tickets. It's at this point I smile, sit back and start browsing all my meme sites. Yes, joys of Active Directory control, I gave myself unrestricted internet access. A nice perk. Anywho, in less than an hour, Passive Gal comes to me to ask what's happening. I simply state that the contract amendment they forced on us clearly means I don't have to work for 200 days. So I'll be sitting here enjoying my time off, or I can do it from home. Either way, I'm ahead of the curve. She walks away and Moron Boy storms over demanding I get back to work. I repeat what I said to Passive Gal. He spluttered for a while, and he huffs off. True to my word, I sat at my desk doing nothing, but sadly it didn't last 2 days before the head of the department called me in. After an initially aggressive start to the meeting on his part, I got to explain the situation. I wasn't even to the good part, and he drops his head into his palm, calmly listens to the story, asks me for a copy of the amendment, and thanks me for the time. 2 hours later he calls me back and asks me, with sassy and funny gal in the room, what would it take to get me back to work? I decided to keep it simple, formally retract the stupid amendment, and pay me out for the time spent on the audit, which is 600 days, as per the contract amendment. He blowfished for a few seconds, agreed, and I left for the day. Wake up the next morning to a huge jump in my bank account, with an email confirming I'll be back in the office, please? I am a man of my word. I was back at my desk, working as usual, and for some reason, Moron Boy and Passive Gal never came near me again, even when I shifted to another department. Edit: the actual verbiage of the contract is lost to history, and I apologize, it's misleading. The scope of the mandate was strongly worded to do no more and no less than 10 a day, not at least. Next story. Debit cards. I work at Woodforest National Bank, For those who don't know, it's a bank based out of Texas located primarily on the East Coast inside of Walmart. This story happened about a month ago. One of our usual entitled Karen customers comes into the bank demanding we print her a new debit card because she lost her old one. We issue debit cards same day so long as they pay a debit card fee, $10 for a reprint or $15 for a new card, waived for certain accounts. A reprint was a simple task, so I print her card and send her on her way. She then walks back into the bank because the last two numbers were slightly rubbed off. This is due to how the machine prints the cards and is pretty common. Entitled Karen, I want you to print this card again. Me, is it not working? Entitled Karen, look at the last two numbers. Other banks don't give me cards with rubbed off numbers. Me, I'm sorry ma'am, but sometimes that happens with the machine. It rubs part of the numbers off when activating the chip. Entitled Karen, I don't care, it looks terrible. Do it again. Me, ma'am, I don't think this is a good idea. We really don't have control over how the machine. Entitled Karen raising her voice, I don't care what you have to do, just print my card again so it looks nice. She takes a pair of scissors and cuts up the card into tiny pieces in front of me. Entitled Karen, print the F card now, or do I have to close my account and contact market manager's name? The market manager isn't someone you would know unless you have had a conversation with him before. It's obvious she's trying to name drop him to get me to shut up and comply. Cue malicious compliance. I turn over to my manager and he gives me a nod. I then put on a devious smile and say, absolutely ma'am, but to ensure this won't happen again we will need to change the numbers, so I'm going to need you to sign some things. Entitled Karen, see, was that so hard? We then spend the next 10 minutes printing out new cards until we get one that doesn't have the numbers slightly rubbed off. Each time the card isn't to her liking, she cuts it up and says to do it again. I just smile and say, sorry about this, let's try again each time, until about 8 cards later she finally gets a card number that isn't rubbed off. Entitled Karen, finally, this card looks good, thanks. She just leaves with a smug grin thinking she won and leaving us with her massive pile of cut-up debit cards. What we forgot to remind her of is having a completely new card generated outside of fraud or expiration cost $15 to be deducted from your account. This is made clear at account opening, and since she signed off on having all these new cards printed, there was nothing she could say. Normally I try and help people avoid bank fees, but in this case F this entitled woman. A couple days later she comes storming into the bank looking pissed. Entitled Karen, what the F did you do to my account? Me, I'm sorry ma'am, but what seems to be the problem? Entitled Karen, there's a bunch of debit card fees on my account. What the F did you do? Me, oh, every time you had me print a new debit card for you the other day, a $15 fee was charged to your account. The first one where you only had me reprint the card number was only $10. Entitled Karen, you need to effing reverse these fees right now before I call market manager name and get you fired. At this point my manager steps in. Manager, hello ma'am, what's the issue? Entitled Karen, your dumb employee tricked me into paying over $100 worth of fees because he kept effing up my debit card. Manager, ma'am, could you please not yell? Also, I was there, you demanded we print you a new debit card because you didn't like the numbers being rubbed off. We have your signature on these forms stating that you wanted these cards to be printed. I will not be reversing these fees for you. Entitled Karen, then I want to close me account. Manager, okay, but first you need to pay off your negative account balance as well as your line of credit. Entitled Karen, just give me market manager name's number this instant. Me, sorry ma'am, but we aren't at liberty to just give out his number like that. Here is the number to customer service if you would like. This is true as he's instructed us to not give his number out to any customer who asks. The only people who need his number already have it. She takes the number, screams, I'll have your jobs for this, flips us off, kicks over a chair and storms out. We get a call from customer care later about the incident where we explain everything and scan over all the signed debit card applications. Also, she had us print 8 brand new cards and the one reprint. That cost her about $130 in fees because she demanded a new debit card. The best part is my manager likely would have just waived the original $10 fee had she just been nice and asked. Next story. Want us to strictly follow company policies? No problem. This malicious compliance comes from a few years ago when I was working as an external developer for a software house. The team was great and the lead developer, let's call him Mark, was simply the best to work with. He was a very skilled developer with also the ability to easily coordinate the team's tasks. We also had a manager, John, who was also very friendly and easy to talk to. Our job was going smoothly. The company tracked the progress of the various projects in a software where John divided them in various steps. John set up these steps very broadly, e.s. analyses, initial setup, development, release, maintenance, to avoid creating too many of them. We then needed to input the time we spent on each of these steps. If the project was missing some steps or hit the budget cap, we couldn't input our timesheets and, technically, weren't allowed to start working. Per company policy, our duty was to inform our direct superior about these issues, in this case Mark. He then should have informed John, who finally would have to increase the cap. As the good manager that he was, John knew all these steps were a huge waste of Mark's and our time, so he allowed us to temporarily sign our timesheets locally and start or continue our work, gather himself all of our cap increase requests together, do all of them simultaneously, and then directly let us know we could input our timesheets in the software. Then, the company got acquired by an hedge fund. Suddenly a lot of new middle managers appeared, and John was moved to a higher position in a different department. To replace him, they hired Phil. Phil tried to present himself as the open to everyone's requests manager, but it became obvious pretty quickly that he was more a I'll stick to company policies as harder as I can guy, probably to appeal to his ego or to some higher up. First thing he did was to completely change the project's organization, to better check the project advancement. Now in a project, every task, every little change, had its own step and budget cap. Remember that if the step was not in the software, we weren't allowed to start working on it. He then enforced our daily timesheets input. It became mandatory to input them at maximum the next day, so we could be more responsible about marking the project progress. It could have been okay if it wasn't for the fact that projects' budgets were drastically reduced. Basically, after reaching the middle of our developments, we already reached those caps and could not insert any more timesheets. When we started asking Phil about creating those steps or raising the budget caps, like we did with John, he quickly redirected us to Mark, as that was the company policy and the proper chain of command. Mark's job quickly became hell, as he basically had to spend half day asking Phil to create project steps or raise caps. We knew we were bothering Mark, and he knew we couldn't do anything else. He tried to talk to Phil about easing these policies, but without success. At the end of the month, everyone was behind with the timesheets input, and some tasks were not started at all. Phil gathered us, and other teams, and started his rant about how it was our fault since we required too much time to do our job and it was not acceptable. As our team leader, Mark was particularly targeted and probably missed some bonuses that he had no problem getting when John was the manager. His fault? Not letting Phil know soon enough that steps weren't available or budget caps were reached. It was enough for him. It was time to maliciously comply to company policies. He asked Phil to let us stay some minutes after the meeting to explain us how to resolve these issues. He agreed but wanted to stay in the meeting too. Mark calmly said to us, "It is imperative that you tell me, and only me, that steps are missing or caps have been reached as soon as you notice. You must send me an email with this precise subject. I'll then inform Phil. Only mail requests will be accepted." He remarked various times that the mail needed to have a specific subject format, like Project X Step Y missing or Project X Step Y cap reached, and every time he was looking at us with a look that was saying, "Just do like I say, trust me." We started doing exactly what he told us, and soon discovered why he was so confident. A few days passed, and an angry Phil stormed in our room yelling at Mark that his behavior was unacceptable and an urgent meeting with the higher-ups was scheduled in a few minutes. Mark went, and after about half an hour returned with a satisfied smile on his face, and after him a defeated Phil. He later told us that he basically set up a forwarding rule in his mailbox, which forwarded to Phil every single mail whose subjects matched the patterns above, with a predefined text like, "Dear Phil, I'd like to inform you that the team brought to my attention the fact that Project X ID missing Step Y or similar." In those few days, he submerged Phil's mailbox with our requests. Phil probably hoped that the outcome of the meeting would have went in his favor, but the higher-ups stated that no company policy was violated, Mark wasn't spamming as those were all legitimate work-related emails, and was Phil's duty to appropriately manage the situation. Also, Mark now had proof that he was immediately notifying Phil about the project's issues, so nothing could be his or our fault anymore. I stopped working for the company shortly after, but after a few months they told me that Phil was demoted and moved to another position with lesser responsibilities. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.